Hello and welcome to this week's Ask an Atheist. My name is Ryan Jane and I'm a staff attorney for the Freedom from Religion Foundation. As always, if you have questions about our topic today, you can drop them in the comments below or send an email to askanatheist@ffrf.org. Today we're going to be looking at an astounding violation of the separation of church and state coming out of East Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And joining me are staff attorney Chris Line and one of our new legal fellows, Kat Grant. Chris is a familiar face for all of our viewers, but Kat is new. So Kat, do you want to take a moment to introduce yourself to our audience and how you came to find yourself at FFRF and why you care about state-church separation?
So my name is Kat Grant. I use they, them pronouns, and I am an Equal Justice Works Fellow here at the Foundation. I just started in September, so brand new. I was actually an intern during the remote COVID years when we were all hiding in our homes. So summer of 2020 into the school year of 2021. I just graduated from Indiana University Maurer School of Law. And I basically kind of stumbled into the internship. I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I started law school. And so I just kind of applied for anything that really interested me. And I grew up in very rural, very Christian-heavy Southern Indiana. And I grew up, as someone who is trans and someone who is gay. And so I knew really firsthand a lot of the experiences that happen, especially to LGBT youth, when there are a lot of violations between the separation of church and state. And so I was like, this seems like it would be a really good fit. The internship went super well. And when it came time, summer before my 3L year, I was encouraged to apply for a program called Equal Justice Works, which funds young public interest lawyers right out of law school or right out of clerkships to do 2-year fellowships in different types of public interest work. And so I went to Rebecca and was like, what do you think about applying for this? And at first it started as a conversion therapy project, and then it really expanded into any and every kind of LGBT-centered separation of church and state issues. So that's what I'm doing for the next 2 years. I'm really excited to really focus in, and it's, really upsetting what has just happened, but it was nice to jump into something really big like this.
Yeah, absolutely. We are so lucky to be able to keep you, because obviously you were one of our strongest interns where, we invited you to come back, and we're so lucky that you had this opportunity for the fellowship. And there's a huge overlap that we often talk about on the show about LGBT rights and state-church separation. So having someone dedicated to that space, I think, is really beneficial.
It's also important to note that you didn't mention this, but the Equal Justice Fellowship is very competitive, correct? It's hard to get that.
There were about, I believe, 380 so applicants this past cycle, and I think there were 83 of us that were funded, and I was the only project funded in the state of Wisconsin. So it's a very big fellowship, a very prestigious fellowship, so we're very lucky to have those resources and to have been able to get this project going and off the ground.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so a brand new superstar public service attorney. And so we're here today to talk about one of the cases that you've been working on recently. So do you want to give us kind of the lay of the land? We're in East Baton Rouge. Do you want to tell us just the basics of what the complaint was and how we heard about it?
Yeah, so basically just a couple weeks ago, there was this event that was billed to high school seniors in the East Baton Rouge Parish School System. That it was billed as a college and career fair where there was going to be food and a guest speaker and games. A permission slip was handed out to release students from school. Some students were bused, some students drove. And they got there, and it was at a church, and it was a preaching event. They were segregated by gender. Girls were placed into one room. Boys were let outside in the heat for a while the girls had girl talk. Transgender students were not permitted, at least initially, to go with the group that aligned with their gender identity. Wow. And while they were there, they were preached to about forgiving rapists, forgiving abusers, being good Christian girls. Just a really gross amount of proselytizing that happened here. And most of these students, if not all of them, had no idea that this was going to be a Christian-centered event, had no idea it was at a church, did not know this was run by something called the 2911 Mentorship Academy. Most students, teachers, parents have all said they had no idea that this was a Christian organization. It was very much a bait and switch. And so it really really took off both in the news and amongst parents. We received complaints from community members all across the community as well as nationally saying, hey, this happened, this doesn't feel right. So we were able to get a letter out pretty quickly, and we're currently investigating next steps on this. But, you know, really it moved very quickly. Students came together and complained and really made a ruckus on Facebook and social media, and so it really got a lot of attention really, really quickly.
Yeah, I think we've got a video clip that can kind of dive a little bit more into the details that we can show.
After a career fair school trip took kids to a church, some parents in the parish are now wanting to take the school board to court.
I just wanted to do what I could to try to show the students and the educators that there are people who are going to stand up and make sure that the district takes responsibility when it makes mistakes.
Mary Patricia Ray is raising thousands of dollars in support of East Baton Rouge parents suing the school board following backlash over a career fair. EBR school superintendent came on our show to promote the event, as well as a new partnership.
I always tell people it takes a village to do this work, and we're excited about 2911 partnering with us.
Narcissa's Day of Hope builds on existing workforce development programs, and according to a memorandum, that partnership cost the school system nearly $10,000.
You got to help kids to start making choices around financial literacy, choices around career and life, and so these programs are important.
But hundreds of comments on the school system's Facebook page argue that's not what happened.
There are children who say this event harmed them because it triggered issues about suicide that they weren't prepared to confront without experts there to support them.
The school system's initial response did not acknowledge parents' concerns, so now they're taking action, and Ray hopes it sends a message to the school board.
I think shows that this community is engaged with this issue and that we're not going to go away until someone takes responsibility, apologizes, and makes sure that it never happens again.
So a couple things to emphasize there. You love to see the local activism, at least, you know, when there's something just awful like this that happens. It's good to see that it's not just one person complaining or an outside group that comes in. There's a groundswell of people who are really upset about this. And so the partnership between the local activists and a national org like FFRF is what's going to hopefully bring some much needed education to these government actors and to prevent this kind of stuff from happening again.
Yeah, we're seeing this more and more. You know, as you know, in our recent lawsuit in West Virginia, where a preacher came into the school, preached to a bunch of kids, and then the kids themselves started protesting. Hundreds of them walked out. You may have seen yesterday a lot of kids in in Virginia walked out because of the new trans bill. So we're seeing more and more students and parents just not taking it. You know, like we know that for a long time these sort of things have been happening where schools are mixing with religion, they're taking kids to churches, kind of trying to blur the line between church events, school events, and things like that. And now we're just seeing more and more kids are standing up and not allowing schools to just get away with it.
Yeah, it's excellent. Well, we have a video of the event, which was posted by some of the musicians who were there. That's a lot of kids there.
Yeah, and you can see we'll get to it at the end of the video here, the description at the bottom really articulates that the person shooting this thought this was a religious event. There was no question. I mean, the school district's trying to play dumb. They wrote, some opportunities never get old, and here's one of them for us, to watch all students come in from all over the city, some full of expectation and others extremely reluctant, go from that current state to true life change in the presence of Jesus is what we live and breathe for. We want to send a major shout out to the visionary, our brother, Tremaine, the creator of this event, for adhering to the voice of God and starting such a movement in our city. As we shared afterwards from the students to the police officers who were in the room, everyone shared how Jesus was felt and made known in such a special way. And it's because of your yes, brother. We know that none of your efforts are in vain, and the testimony from students thereafter was and will remain the evidence and proof. On a personal note, whether we get to minister or just come and be in the room, we'll always be honored to be part of God's revival on earth amongst this generation. So this person who took part in the event clearly thought that this was a religious event. There's no question, there's no ambiguity about what happened. And the school district should have known this. they partnered with a group called 2911. Well, 2911 is named after Jeremiah 29:11, which says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." So you have a religious group named after a Bible verse, led by, I believe, the main person there is a pastor, putting this event on in a church that costs the school district $9,000. There's some news articles going around explaining that if it had cost $10,000, the school board would have had to approve it. But because they only paid $9,600, the school board never had to see all this info. And I think that may have been a way that they were trying to sneak this in.
Little shady.
Under the line.
Well, and it makes me laugh too when you see that that description of it, because if you're trying to defend a school district in these sort of situations, we're used to dealing with attorneys for government who try to say, this wasn't really that religious, and so that description, that's what we'd call a bad document. It's pretty hard to sell the point that, no, this was just actually a secular event. It's not that big of a deal. So yeah, that's a rough one.
Yeah, and I saw initially in the public, the school district stood by it at first. Their first statement was very much like, no, this was like a good event. We did this and we're going to stand by it. I think within the past couple of days, though, they did change and are now walking it back a bit and saying, like, oh, we didn't know there was going to be this religion, which is ridiculous because obviously this partnership, this whole event was put on by the superintendent, who then took part in the event. The idea that he would have not only agreed for the district to go, known he was speaking, and yet had no idea about what else was going to go on seems a little bit ridiculous.
Yeah, seems to me like just a total apology is obviously in order, and then after that, we need to have some kind of grounds to show that this is not going to happen again, because this was not an accident, right?
Exactly. As the clip showed, there's a GoFundMe being run by a local person there on behalf of a lot of parents. They're trying to raise money to potentially take legal action. We've not talked with them. FFRF has reached out to the Mary Patricia from the clips and who's running this thing. She also created a website, dayofnope.com, I think it is, just trying to collect stories about people. Right there on the website it says taxpayer-funded trauma for our kids. Just say nope. And they're trying to reach out and to local parents in the area and see what kind of stories come out, what the personal impact was on all of these students and on their families. And like I said, we've reached out to them, and hopefully we can get in touch and see what action might be necessary going forward just to make sure this doesn't happen. Because even though the school district is walking it back a little bit now, we have experience of these things in the past, and we know that they will say the right things when the heat's on, when this public pressure is going on, and then as soon as that public pressure goes away, they start to sneak these things back in. We want to make sure that these students don't have to deal with this again,
Yeah, plus, the other thing, it's always on my mind, is also that to an extent the damage has been done, right? If you drag students to this event and subject them to this, you can't just say, oh, sorry, we won't do it again. Even if they really won't do it again, there needs to be some kind of consequences for this, because this is real harm that was done to these kids.
Yeah, and this is, like we've kind of known, this is just very egregious. This isn't the type of situation like we've dealt with in other cases where you bring in a speaker to give a motivational talk and they just go out and you're like, oh no, they went off the wall, they went super religious, we didn't know it was going to happen. They took the kids here. This is an extremely well-planned, extremely expensive event. They bust, what was it, 2,000?
Yeah,
2,000
it was over
kids.
2,000 kids. The scale of this was just massive, like over 2,000 children, so many of whom have reached out via social media to say, I was traumatized by this. I was not prepared for this. No one gave us any information about what this event actually was going to be. And so this is just such a huge scale event.
Yeah.
Right. So it's clearly well planned and well thought out. It's not a situation where, we just spur of the moment made these plans to take 2,000 kids to an event. They've been planning it for a while. They know this group's religious. It's just inexcusable that this took place.
Yeah. And so, Chris, you're kind of a veteran to these sorts of situations. People who've been watching the show for a while might remember a series of events that you were really on top of for a long time, which was called the Todd Becker Foundation. Can you kind of remind people what that's about and compare and contrast what was going on there to this?
Yeah, the Todd Becker Foundation is a traveling ministry that goes around to schools and puts on sort of a toned down version of the religious thing during the school day, but uses that to entice kids to come back at night to the full religious revival. And that's a strategy done by a lot of people. That's very similar to what happened in our lawsuit too in West Virginia, where this pastor minister would go into schools, except there he gives the actual religious thing in the schools and then holds another revival at night. So he's actually using the schools. Todd Becker's the Todd Becker Foundation tries to be a little more subtle about it, tries to get schools to let them in by pretending it's not going to be religious. And they used to be much more explicitly religious, but because we've been writing to schools for so long, they've had to tone it back. The difference here, obviously, being the district should have known a lot more. The district took the students to them in a church. I mean, even if this was a completely secular event, we'd obviously note that it's inappropriate to hold an event in a church. There's religious stuff around there. Many people who have faced religious trauma in the past don't want to be brought into a church. And particularly, they shouldn't happen as a surprise. This wasn't like, oh, they knew they were going to a church, and so what do you expect? The students were not told about that. I know from the facts that, apparently also the food there, pizza was a lot of what enticed these kids to come. We see that at school events too,
Classic.
where a religious group will come in and say, hey, we're bringing pizza in for lunch. You go to eat the pizza, and then you get prayed at, proselytized to, and everything.
That happened in law school for me, but it was like, come eat the pizza, and then once you get there, it's like, we're going to talk about tax law. Like, oh, you got me. But
yeah,
this is
everyone
much
in law
worse.
school has pizza involved. But yeah, apparently as a part of this event, the students were not allowed to eat pizza until they registered to vote,
Wow.
which is coercive, but I mean, tough one, because I do think all students should register to vote, and hopefully if more students are registering to vote, we can avoid these kind of issues in the future as we sort of change the way that our elected officials do things.
Yeah.
So.
As a general matter, I think holding pizza hostage is a pretty messed up way to go about getting kids to do anything.
Right, denying food to people who are a captive audience here at this church that aren't able to leave or do anything is just one of the many, many problems that took place here.
Yeah, so I guess the things that really strike me as, Chris, you and I have seen a ton of these. Kat, you're kind of new to this, but I can tell you from our perspective anyway, compared to the stuff we ordinarily see, the standout aspects of this particular complaint are the massive scale of it. That's really unusual, and then also just the kind of openness that the school took to this is shocking, to me. Like I was saying earlier, usually they try to at least leave some room to claim ignorance, to say, well, we thought this was going to be a secular event, but here it's just this religious ministry that they're openly partnering with. They're not trying to say, like with Todd Becker, like, oh, well, we're going to bring them into the school to give a secular presentation. They're saying, no, we're going to bring kids to a church and then just lay all this religious stuff on them. And the superintendent participated on top of it. I mean, he can't plead individual ignorance either and say, oh, well, this is a rogue teacher, a rogue principal. It's like, no, you're the head of the whole school system, and you personally went and participated in this. It's just astounding.
Yeah, so as I said, we're trying to reach out to we've gotten complaints from local people in the district, and we're trying to reach out to the woman from those clips in order to discuss what we might do next, just to make sure. I mean, I think given the backlash, there's a good chance that they're not going to do this exact thing again in the future, but clearly the district doesn't understand the line here for separation of church and state and what's appropriate for students in a public school. And so we want to work with everyone we can from the local community to make sure that this type of thing doesn't happen again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think that given the track record of the Supreme Court recently, I would not be surprised to see more school officials feeling emboldened to do this sort of thing. So we expect to see, if anything, unfortunately, an uptick. But it's nice to see that the kids are right there on the front lines objecting to this stuff, and so we hear about it, we're able to partner with them and help them out. But it's definitely a time where we need local activists to be speaking up and speaking against these sorts of activities.
Yeah, I definitely think it's really admirable of these kids. I think especially as someone who I think is the most solidly Gen Z person on the legal staff.
Thanks.
Social media has become so powerful, and I think a lot about, when I started with my own LGBT activism and my own advocacy when I was like 13, 14. These kind of communities did not exist 10, 12, 13 years ago. And now you're seeing all of these kids come together. And it shouldn't be up to these children to stand up and say, I was hurt, this is wrong. It should be up to the adults in the room to protect them. But the fact that they have each other, that they have, older people who are reaching out to them now and like really helping them build this activism community, I think is really, really important and really, really critical to making sure that these kind of events don't happen again. Because the more people speak up, the more people are going to feel emboldened to say, this was wrong. Because it's really hard to be the kid that's like, I was not up for this whole Christianity Jesus event in a school where that's the predominant view. And so I think really community building has really been helped by social media as much as it hurts a lot of other things. And so I think just seeing the shift from when I was these kids' age to even now, I think has been really, really interesting to see, and it's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. And it's a great point that, you have to keep in mind the community. When you have a superintendent who's acting this way, it's probably not a very friendly atmosphere to go and say, hey, I don't think this is appropriate. Like, he puts on a friendly face for the news, but school admins, I would not bet on them being super friendly to students who are speaking out against this sort of thing in, behind closed doors. So you have to think about the discomfort of someone who's in this situation and probably feels like they can't complain in the ordinary fashion. So yeah, it's fantastic that we have this kind of arsenal of social media to be able to communicate and amplify these views in a way that reaches beyond the community, but is also, is able to connect with people in the community as well.
Yeah, and we're going to continue. As you know, the Supreme Court has taken the view that it's concerned with regard to religion in the public square is, what about the rights of the praying coach? What about the rights of a teacher? Yes. What about the rights of all these people who are authority figures in schools and things? And we're going to fight for what really matters, is the rights of the students. And as we know, the students are not standing for this anymore, and we're going to do our best to help them to stop this stuff from happening going forward.
Absolutely, and to kind of remind people why state-church separation is important in the first place, right? Like when people see, they say, oh, well, there's these problems that kids are facing. What's so wrong with giving them a message of hope, right? And it's like, well, you're really missing the entire picture here. And imagine what if you're the one Muslim kid who's in the class and you're going and you're being told that your solution to all your problems is to come to Jesus.
I mean, even differently than that, Christian students, Christian parents who are involved, whose churches don't require you to hate gay people, hate trans people. I'm sure that they're not okay with their students being given this sort of anti-LGBT religious angle when might not be their Christian views, So there's just no excuse for this, and everyone can kind of see the issues here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, any other points about the case? Otherwise, we do have a few questions we can go to, but I want to give either of you an opportunity if there's anything we haven't mentioned yet.
Yeah, I'm ready for questions.
All right, so let's see what we got. So first, Tim P. asks, I assume this was the first time this happened at the school or just the first time that the students complained? Do we know, has this happened before?
Yeah, I believe it has. I don't have a lot of info on it. I do know that this is, I believe, not the first Day of Hope event. I don't know if the exact same things took place or what. I didn't get a chance to research that, but I do believe this potentially has happened in the past, which, if that is the case, is even worse for the district. If we can show that, like, oh, this is the first time maybe everyone's spoken out about it, but they may have a pattern of promoting these type of things, and that's obviously something we're going to be looking into going forward. Mm-hmm. I don't know if we did. Yeah, I think we had talked about doing an open records request to the district.
Yeah, we just did that. We just sent that out yesterday.
Yeah, great. So we've just sent an open records request, so we're going to get more information about this, and that obviously would be an important factor. Is if this has happened in the past, was it the same? If so, then they have extra no excuse for allowing it to happen again. If it was different, then we'll have to look into that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, next question from Amy B. asks, you mentioned that, quote, real harm happened to these kids. That's something that I said. Could you describe what that means? So I'm happy to explain what I meant, but do either of you want to first weigh in on your thoughts of like what was the actual harm that was done to the kids who were at this event?
Yeah, well, these kids were preached to about really, really serious, really potentially triggering topics, especially for students with any kind of trauma. They were talked to about suicide, sexual assault. They were talked to about domestic abuse in a way that very much put the onus on the victim. It was very patriarchal. It was very victim blaming. These kids could have gone through those things or known people who have gone through those things or simply were not emotionally prepared to handle those types of conversations. And that was just within like the actual planned content of the event. We also have several reports of trans students in particular being viciously bullied. You know, they had water poured on their heads, you know, mocked. Some were prevented from using the bathroom. And none of the adults in the room intervened whatsoever, which was a direct violation, actually, of the school district's own anti-bullying policy, which was something else we noted in our letter. So both in terms of being exposed to content that they may not have been psychologically prepared for, as someone in one of the clips noted, there were no therapists, counselors, you know, anyone who was really qualified for these kids to go to and be like, hey, this was really upsetting. So that can cause a lot of, you know, either reoccurring trauma or new trauma for things that they and their parents did not consent to hearing. And I think recognizing that harm is really, really important, even though sometimes it may not look like really direct harm. It has long-term consequences.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, those are perfect and horrible examples. The other thing, of course, in kind of the abstract is that from the state church angle, when you have a government body that is pushing a particular religious view onto students, that's not something that you can just easily undo, right? The whole reason that we care about state church separation in public schools so much is that parents have the right to direct the religious upbringing of their kids. That's something that the Supreme Court has recognized for a long, long time, and of course it's under some threat right now. But that is a cornerstone that I think we need to remind people of, that there's a reason that churches target public schools. They want to get in and get to students when they're young and vulnerable and impressionable. And so once the school is a part of that, once they conspire with a church to try to bring kids to Jesus, that is an assault on the constitutional rights of kids that I think is absolutely also real harm. And on the parents as well, for that matter. You know, having your school come in and give this religious message to your kids is a real harm too. And so that state church argument is something that we've always made in our letters and in our lawsuits, and I think it's absolutely right. But the answer that Kat gave is definitely the even more concrete answer to the question of how are these particular kids harmed in this particular event. That's what you described is this serious individualized harm.
I mean, and also if you just look at it from the view of the parents, you know, you get a thing that says, hey, your kid wants to go to this Day of Hope college fair, whatever, doesn't say it's in a church, doesn't say give much info at all, like, well, the school's putting on, it must be fine, you know, you sign, like, go, and then your kid comes back and is like, whoa, we went to a church, there was praise and singing and just all this, you know, crazy religious stuff going on. It just definitely violates the rights of parents to make decisions on things like that. I mean, not that it would have been okay if they'd come out and said, hey, we want to take these kids to a religious event in the middle of the school. Like, that would have violated the Establishment Clause, but it adds that nefarious element on top of it of, you know, why, you know, who hid it from who, especially with all this planning, you know, is it the church group hid it from the school? Like, who really was deceived here? It certainly seems like it was the parents who were deceived, and the school district knew this was what was going to occur, but allowed it anyways, which is obviously a huge harm to the parents.
Yeah. Well said. Okay, next question from Mel. Mel R. asks, what can FFRF do about something like this after the fact? This is kind of the other side. We can't undo the harm that's been done, but what is it that we can do, and how do we approach this when we find out about an event like this that's already happened?
Yeah, so in this particular case, we both saw, it was kind of very simultaneous. We saw the news reports and we got reports through our reporting system all at the same time. And we jumped on this pretty quickly. So we wrote a letter, we got that out informing the superintendent that, hey, this is what happened, this is not okay, here are all of the legal reasons why this is not okay. And now we have this open records request investigating this partnership between the school district and 2911, really trying to get a sense of what is happening, what has happened, and what might happen in the future. And so this all moves very, very quickly, and we try to stay as on top of it as possible.
Yeah, and we gather, I mean, that's always the first step. You want to gather as much as information as possible so that we can make the best decisions about what would be the best thing for us to do to help these kids. As I said, from a more technical standpoint, we've reached out to that group run by that woman that is trying to raise funds to potentially take legal action. We obviously want to get a hold of them so that we can talk to more of these parents, talk to more students, figure out about actual harm done to those students and what what kind of action they may be able to take potentially. We've also, I know, Americans United had talked about this. They also, I believe, sent a letter. We're in contact with them, trying to just figure out amongst everyone. I mean, that's the nice part about these sort of things. Since we all kind of are on the same page about how bad this is, everyone's able to kind of come together and go, hey, how do we all utilize our resources to best, make this stop? So there's not a lot of issues with that. We all kind of come together, local people, the major organizations like FFRF, and we're going to go ahead and investigate, look into it, and see what action we might be able to take, whether legal action is required or whether the school district's going to just realize all this backlash, realize the legal jeopardy they put themselves in, and just make the changes necessary on their own. But that's sort of the things we can do.
Yeah, and in terms of either an actual lawsuit or just the specter or the potential of a lawsuit, a lot of times the benefit of bringing a national org like FFRF in is that when you have local activists raising money to try to fight this, they will often find really good local attorneys who are in court every day. They handle civil rights violations. They're really good at what they do, but they're not state church experts. And so it's nice when you have a state church issue like this to bring in our team of lawyers who this is all that we do. So we're quite good at it, right? And so it's kind of a nice 1-2 punch where you have the local litigator who knows on the ground how courts in Louisiana work and that aspect of it, and then we come in with the subject matter expertise.
Right, and we touched on it, but of course it's important to point out that besides any legal action or anything like that, the students themselves, like I said, in our before we were able to sue in West Virginia, we hadn't even filed the lawsuit, and the students walked out. And that happens all over. And those are the type of things we need parents speaking out. In many other areas where we haven't been able to take lawsuits, we get parents at school boards complaining about this, just not giving up, really pressing it, making sure people are aware, because when people become aware of these things, we get more support, everyone's able to come together, and we can hopefully make some changes without even having to take lawsuits. We can just, through policy change and through teaching people about why this is wrong, we can make change.
Yeah, because that's the other aspect, right, is we can do what we're doing right now, which is just help to amplify the message and get the word out there about this so that it's more in the public discourse.
Of course.
All right, let's see. Jill Z asks, is this event going to continue or has the school district decided to end it? So you touched on that, but do you want to just remind us what we know about that?
Yeah, I had just read the most recent statement from the district a little while ago. Like I said, they were kind of walking things back now, so it kind of said, oh, we didn't know this was going to be religious, something along those lines. I don't have it in front of me. But my guess then would be knowing that they would not partner with this group again. And of course, that would be the bare minimum they can do. I think they owe a lot more. They definitely owe an apology to the students and the parents. But then after that, of course, they need to be making sure this doesn't happen again. And I would be surprised given the huge backlash and what the parents have done, even without a lawsuit. I think that it would be surprising if they tried to do this specific thing again. But obviously, as I said, it seems like the district doesn't quite understand the line. So who knows what other type of events, what other type of partnerships and things that they're going to allow to happen because they don't necessarily understand what they can and can't do.
Yeah, well, and I'd be pretty upset if I was on the school board and I found out that they did this sneaky action of bringing it in just under $10,000 so they don't have to run it by you. Say maybe it's time to revise those policies so you can keep an eye on this superintendent.
Yeah, I mean, that is kind of a crazy line to think, we can just hold a near $10,000 event and the school board doesn't ever have to hear anything about it. Is kind of crazy. So.
All right, and we have one more question from Dave C. asks, is this a national program or just local? In other words, can this happen or has it happened in other districts around the country?
I mean, things like this happen all over. This is, I mean, religious groups like 2911 are trying to get into our schools every day in most areas. All over that. This individual program, the 2911, I don't believe is a national group. I think it is a local group.
Yeah, it is local specifically to Baton Rouge.
Okay.
Yeah, so this specific thing isn't going to happen, but the violations occur everywhere. There's so many groups, large groups, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, just tons of groups where their main goal, Child Evangelism Fellowship, Todd Becker Foundation. I literally could list hundreds that are just going after school kids, and they know. I mean, they make it very explicit. So many of these groups say, if we don't talk to kids about God by the time they're 14, there's basically no chance that they're going to join our religion. And they know that, and they tout that, and they have unabashed in going after children in schools. And so that's definitely an area that we focus on. Most of our complaints come out of schools because that's just, where it happens. I mean, the ability to proselytize and convert an adult to your religion is just not that high. Obviously we have a lot of problems in, cities promoting religion, things like that. But the rate of getting and being able to proselytize is stronger in schools. And so we need to work to protect them because this is happening all over the country.
Absolutely. And I would say, we probably see more of this where you'd kind of expect it in like the Bible Belt, and probably you see more of these recalcitrant superintendents who are just saying, we're bringing kids to Jesus because that's what I'm a superintendent for. You kind of see that often where you would expect to see it. But we've seen these church events and these religious assemblies all over the place. I remember seeing them in Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Washington, just kind of some places that might be a little bit surprising. It's not, your usual suspect. So this does happen all over the place.
And we're going to be hearing about it more and more. Yeah. So as we touched on, the youngest generation is the least. Each successive generation is clearly becoming less and less religious. Religion is, falling out of favor in this country. And so now towns and cities that may have been doing these things for decades and getting away with it, now the younger students are not religious and aren't just going along with it. They're speaking out, and so we're going to hear more about it. There's going to be more fights on it, and it's just something we're going to have to, keep at.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Chris and Kat, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about this. That is going to conclude Ask an Atheist for this week. Thank you for joining us, and be sure to check out FFRF's broadcast TV program, Free Thought Matters. This week, our guest is Washington Post columnist Kate Cohen, who wrote an excellent call to atheism article in the Post over the summer. Here's a preview.
Using the word atheist, it still is a bit of a shock for some people, I think, and people do want to soften that word. I think we should try to reclaim it for what it simply is, which is just not believing that there's a supreme being in charge, which I believe a lot of people, even who call themselves Jews and Christians and Muslims, don't really believe that there's a supreme being up there in charge of things. But yeah, the word atheist still packs a punch.
You can watch Free Thought Matters on TV stations around the U.S. and on Sunday mornings, or on FFRF's YouTube and Facebook channels.
And check out FFRF Free Thought Radio, FFRF's weekly radio show and podcast. This week's guest is Adrian Martin, who will be receiving FFRF's Strong Backbone Award at our upcoming convention in San Antonio. To find out where to listen to FFRF, to listen to Free Thought Radio, visit ffrf.org/radio.
And if you want more information about the Freedom from Religion Foundation, check out our website at ffrf.org. See you next time on FFRF's Ask an Atheist.